Because I've purposely picked this for ugly, because I actually think, even though you're all going to, when you hear the topic, think, wow, this be ugly. This is like good or bad, surely. This has to be ugly if you think of the framing. So, very recently, one of the absolute, we're talking f0rest ballot, we're talking one of the 5 most famous and greatest players in Counter-Strike history, f0rest, officially retired. Here's why it's in ugly. Because as far as I can tell, it wasn't willing. If you don't know, guys, one of the reasons this guy for real did play all those billion qualifiers with Boomer, Stream Demons or whatever, and would keep streaming constantly and kept his level up and did say, in my reflections a few years ago, I'd still like to have a crack at tier 1 or, if you put me on a phase or something, I could perform. Here's the sad thing. I get it, right, when someone was a great player, but they were just a great player. They were one of 500 people who were really good. The idea that you could actually be a GOAT and you're still pushed out the door when you still wanted to play at the end, that is so alien to me coming from a sports background. I get maybe why he wouldn't literally be recruited to FaZe, but the idea f0rest can't be on OG or this NIP or Fnatic. Why? I mean, by the way, Crims is still on Fnatic, and I'd argue f0rest could be better than Crims. You know what I mean? That's the part I don't get. It's I feel like it's such an unceremonious way, because like I say, I want f0rest to retire for real, like a true great sportsman. Hey guys, this is going to be my last season. Thank you for everything. Let's celebrate it. I'm ready to move on. You're ready. This isn't the case, as far as I can tell. Remember, the guy is only isn't he 36 or something? Right? As far as I know, he could probably and would probably choose to play for 1 or 2 more years, or maybe he wanted one last run at it, one last crack at a playoff or something to get out of his system. It just feels a bit kind of whack that our GOATs it ends badly for them like that too. Because I'll throw this in as a last thing as well. I also don't think it's the normal thing sports, you just can't play the game anymore. That wasn't true. It wasn't. As far as I can tell, one of the real things f0rest is a victim of is that everyone is obsessed with the idea that the next player you want to recruit is 17. They don't ever want it to be. Even though what I always say is weird is, we're not making rosters for 10 years, guys. You might only have this roster for a year, so surely f0rest can do his job. He could do this role. Yeah. So I just thought, again, you think of all the great players in history in sports, it's kind of a bit whack, the idea that you're almost forced to retire. It wasn't even really your choice. And then even though we give you all the flowers and we give you all the great moments, I hope people make frag movies and all that jazz. But again, I'd like it to have been in a structured way where it's guys, this is my last year after this last major. Let's agree however far I go, we're going to... That's the way you want to see Neo and fucking Markelov and f0rest and the absolute GOATs go out. Because again, these aren't even just normal players. These are players that are comparable to a Michael Jordan, a LeBron James. Those people should absolutely get their own flowers. And to some degree, the saying in sports, they should be allowed to write their own ticket, as it were, how it ends. They should get some say in it, I think. What do you think, Anders? You obviously have a connection with this guy.
Yeah, I think it's probably really hard to fully do a real a full view on the kind of impact that f0rest had on the game, right? Just to put it into context, for me, when I started working with NIP, with the whole NIP TV back in the day, it was such an intimidating feeling for me to meet these guys the first time. For me to meet Get Right and f0rest and Exist, and I knew less about f0rest and Freiburg just because they came from Source, and I just knew less about that game. But for me, running into these people was it really a celebrity kind of moment for me. I grew up watching these people play Counter-Strike 1.6 and even earlier than that. So for me, it was really surreal. So just to say that that was the level before anyone even really played CSGO, right? And then they built on all the story that most people watching is probably recognize, which is the 87-0 type stuff and finally winning a major. All the way. It's just to say that there's just such an absurd impact on the game and on so many people's lives, probably more than we can ever really sum up. So I agree. There is the to try to find a normal landing for that is probably in itself super hard. But I agree to some extent. It does suck a little bit. And the other thing that I think we're rediscovering this fact now about older players, which is that, sure, you can probably find, a 17-year-old that has a much sicker aim and that also is willing to commit 11 or 12 hours a day to optimizing every single thing. But sometimes the thing you really can't get is the kind of person that can perform really well in the semi-final of a tournament that's on LAN, that has the insane cool to have
dude, the obvious example, because I'm thinking of the match I watched yesterday, is Rain. Rain still does that now, Anders. No one can beat this guy's experience. Still, when he wants to play and he's on his game, he's a fucking stud still, mate.
Yeah, and you're just never gonna get him out of his comfort zone, right?
Yes.
It doesn't matter what the situation is on that day. You put him in front of a crowd, in front of a really big stage where every single thing matters. these people are just like, they're just rock solid in that sense. And the 17-year-old that you hired, like, he can get there one day, like, that's fine, but it is a massive dice roll in the beginning.
Yes.
And that's like, on some level, I think the kind of quality that someone like f0rest would have is, it is being undervalued in that sense. I totally agree. I don't know enough about sports about how it's done, but I mean, like, I have the same feeling. Like, I wish that there was more of a way to honor like everything that someone like f0rest has done for the game. Like, I wish there was like some way to do it that was bigger or more like, yeah, like that. Like, maybe that can still happen. I'm not saying it's like too late or anything, but I'm just saying, like, I sort of share that same emotion that, I think he just deserves like more of a send off in some way and more of like more things in that. Like, I totally agree. So,
what do you think, Maui?
Yeah, I mean, I felt like that was pretty good and conclusive, but I feel like with the way that it happened and what f0rest said about it, and I just feel like I wish he was just given an opportunity in like the tier 2 space or took one. I feel like that was what was confusing for me about it.
Would you agree with me? In a weird way, I'd almost rather he was still playing, like you say, like tier 2, but then I actually saw him fail and I was like, right, now it's fine for him to go. You know, if he just doesn't have it anymore. Like with Kenny S, like, at the end, Kenny S didn't give a fuck and he just wasn't that good. Like, then I'm okay with you moving on. The problem here is he himself's probably haunted by like, could I still have had one last run or something, or one last year or something, right?
Yeah, I think a team like OG would have been a perfect fit, or like you said, NIP. I feel like there's a lot of those teams that have, I would say, tier 1 resources, but you don't even need to give him like a crazy contract. Like, I don't know if he priced himself out or anything like that. That's why it's sometimes hard to comment on things like this, because I don't know necessarily, was he asking for like 8K a month or something, because I don't think he merited that based off of anything recent. But if he was a bit more willing to, and I assume he would have tried lowering his price to a number that would have fit some teams. But if teams like Gamer Legion, are overlooking him completely, like that's the thing that a team like that needs right now, Like,
yeah.
If like Gamer Legion's looking pretty bad in this RMR, I feel like they actually do need a veteran presence. Like, for their oldest guy to be Volt, like, are you kidding me? Like, that's not really going to instill anybody with confidence. But if you got f0rest next to you, I feel like there's so much value in that. And I always have said that the proper roster construction is generally 2 older veteran players and 3 younger ones. But if you really want to min-max, it could just be the 1 veteran player. But with no veteran presence, I just think some of these teams are looking really clueless and kind of like they don't really have an identity either. They're just kind of going through the strat roulette of meta starters and meta finishers, and they don't really know what they're trying to feel throughout the game. So I think someone like that would be a calming presence that would also bring better communication. I think that's also incredibly underrated. So I don't really see why he couldn't have found some home somewhere at any point, unless he just priced himself out. And I don't really want to believe that he priced himself out. I think I have a slightly more cynical angle of organizations and how they just want to look for the next up and coming talent, because we kind of like f0rest is a known quantity. Like, we know I would say he's a fairly known quantity. Like, we know that he's probably not going to peak at like a top 20 player in the world, but could he be a top 50 player in the world again if he's in the right environment? I thought that was always possible. So yeah, it's such a weirdly unceremonious ending for one of the greatest careers that we've ever had in Counter-Strike, period.
By the way, I also do agree, to tie together your points. That is something I've also come to the conclusion of. It's not that there aren't talented rookies who could be really good, but you're also gambling if you have 5 of them or 4 of them. Because if you think about it, like what Anders said, all we need now is one of them to have those stage issues or have a moment where they're not experienced, and suddenly the team can be fucked. Whereas if you have like 2 or 3 young stars and they perform, but then you have like a Rain or a f0rest and then they're going to be fairly rock solid, you're actually just sort of like making the team make more sense in the long run. Also, by the way, one thing I'll touch on finally is because Anders brought up that thing of like when you meet these people don't realize there's a certain aspect where you can't like fake the funk. Like, Maui, you'll know this reference. When they did this recent thing, Maui, where they did the top 75 NBA players of all time, and they brought together all these really truly great players, even people from the 60s and the 70s, really old guys. And what they did is they put them all in a room, Anders, and they had like a thing where they did like a ceremony, where they introduced you, but they also had them just in a room doing like, like a mixer where they could all meet and talk. And the cool thing was, this is one of the coolest things, you would get stuff like today's stars, fanboying over like Michael Jordan, but then the joke was Michael Jordan would be fanboying over some guy from the 70s, and it was like a mutual appreciation society. But here's the cool thing, Maui probably heard this story, which is that all the modern stars say that, like, look, everyone in that room's a legend, like Hall of Famer, but they said the difference is when Michael Jordan walked in the room, it's like everyone's head turned. It's like even Michael Jordan among those stars was like on another tier, like up here, where like even like his rivals and everyone before and after him was like, holy shit, that's Michael Jordan, right? That is the tier f0rest is in, guys. It's not just to fans. If you go to an event, it's a small hand group of people, but if you take people like Neo, for like the absolute goats, even the other players are looking at them differently. Even the vibe when they speak up is so different. It's like everyone can sense these guys are like special, you know.
Yeah, and I think you obviously you really truly mentioned the other person who's probably like Neo is the other person in that conversation, right? Like it's for people who don't know, I mean, I don't know if it's easy to get like a real feeling for what those guys were doing in Counter-Strike 1.6, but they've absolutely redefined what it means to be like at the top of the top. It's crazy too. It's really crazy. I was trying to think. I had another point that was related to this.
Well, I just think that it's important for our scene to celebrate people that have paved the way in all aspects. I just think that's something where people aren't really as grateful for what came before them as they should be in all aspects of life, but especially esports where it's such a Zoomer generation.
Oh, sure.
And especially these kids that are getting paid like $30,000 a month now to play this game on like a top 10 team in the world, like this wouldn't be possible without people like f0rest. And in a lot of ways, people with like f0rest that have such continuity in this space also created such great narratives that we were able to hold on to as fans, pundits alike, which helped further this space. Like if f0rest just decided after a couple of years of not making a ton of money that he said, I'm gonna leave to get a tech job or something like that, well, we wouldn't, then that whole NIP story wouldn't exist. And there's an honest to God chance that if in CSGO in the beginning NIP wasn't there, yeah, like there were some teams that were competing, but without that string of dominance, that was something that a lot of people could latch on to, and it helped elevate the sport so tremendously.
This was going to be my point. I think people really don't understand. There was a really good chance in the beginning of CSGO that if the wrong sort of 5 to 7 people just stopped playing, then it would have been almost like a domino effect of like, well, then who even cares anymore?
Yeah,
because, like,
exactly.
You know, like these people just were the entire brand of the game for those of us who care about the esports side of it in some sense. And here's something else that like in the beginning wasn't like a known thing. And in a way, I'm so grateful that this turned out to be the case. I hope it continues to be the case. But it's so cool now that we have people like Sonic or Exist now who can sort of like, there's still a place for you if you want to be part of it. Whereas there was a real chance for a moment there where it was like, well, if you're no longer going to be like a top player, then you just get to leave and go, and like that's it. We're never seeing you again. Like those positions didn't necessarily exist in the past. So I think now he's like a brand ambassador or something for NIP, but like in a way, like it does warm my heart whenever I see Exist at like events. I'm always so happy to see that, like, you know, he's still like committed to the game. He's still doing all these things. Like his legacy kind of gets to live on because of all the stuff that he's doing, right? And someone like Sonic as well, the same kind of thing, right? So like I think I take that as a good sign for the space as a whole. If people can go on to have careers even after they decide to sort of hang up the mouse and all the rest of it, like that should be the case, I think, if they want to, obviously. Also,
I'll just put this out there. Look, if we're talking just generically about old players that were great and aren't as great anymore, have been out the game for years. Look, again, most people, the normal rules would apply. Yeah, of course I'd get the active player now. Of course I'd get the guy who's proving it today. Of course I'd get the guy where I don't have to hope he shows me form from 4 years ago. The difference is f0rest would be an outlier even in that discussion, though. Like, this is one thing I always make the point of. Funny enough, he's at the Iron now about my boy Oscar on Sinners. Oscar also never just became bad and was forced out the city. He chose to go to Tier 2 and stay home with his family and just play with a Czech team instead of an international team. Like, these guys have just shown longevity that doesn't exist for normal people. They are the outliers. Like, if people don't realise, I think f0rest won his first, like, reasonable size tournament in 2005, and at the end of the day, he was still fine in that Dignitas lineup. He wasn't even that bad at that point. Like, so if you're like, realistically, we're not even talking about like, wow, like 10 years. We're talking like 15 plus years of like being a top 30 player in the world. Again, like Maui says, do I think he would be top 20 now? Of course not. But he could be like the 37th best player. And if you can just run the maths on teams, 5 players per 50 just to get fucking top 10. Like, surely he can play in a top 20 team logically by that logic. Again, and we're even saying, it doesn't even have to be bloody f0rest. He can just be a role player, can't he? I've even always thought, by the way, way, the last thing I'll say on this is as well, the reason why I also pick f0rest is not only is he the ultimate, like, amazing legacy, so you can have his brand associated with yours, you've got all that history, everyone loves him. The last thing I'll throw out there is, I also feel like if you look at the role he has always wanted to play on T-side in fucking CS, you can absolutely do that as a boomer. That's not even necessarily what all the stars want to play, like that kind of aggressive rifle now. Like, you just like Rain, I think that's another reason, by the way, why Rain keeps his career. No one really wants to do that role, bro. It's a role that can be fucking tough, and it requires like fucking just getting killed sometimes. f0rest would also probably be pretty good at that. He's also, by the way, of all the superstars ever, has one of the smallest egos. Like, I always tell people, don't go too far. It's not really like the interviews. One thing that I'll tell you, in fact, I'll tell you one last thing. I'll end on a cool little detail. One thing that is dope about f0rest is he just keeps it off camera. I can tell you, I've seen this guy be quite angry when he lost a final he thought he should have won, or he played badly himself on the last round and lost like a map. He doesn't really go back like, hey guys, I'm cool, and hey, get right, stop being so serious. He's himself pissed off, like, what the fuck, like, I'm better than them. But so he had the competitive fire, but he never went too far the other way. He was never doing simple-esque shit and getting people kicked or being a dickhead to them. Like, he actually did keep his ego in check. So I also I feel like he'd be a fairly, like, easy person to insert into the mix of a team environment as well. He's not going to come in and go, hey, he's not going to do what, I won't name names, but I can imagine some modern day stars might still imagine it's 2017 and demand all the star roles. He's not going to do that. He would just come along and just do his job as a journeyman, I believe. So I actually think he would even fit that Rain Crim sort of longevity filler role in the team approach. It wouldn't even be an issue. So we're not saying he has to be f0rest and try and be the 17th best player in the world or something like that. That's not, even he would know that, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.